This, too, is a good segue for our conversation today, because Zhuangzi is someone who, as we have seen, is very, very into things like opening up realms of possibilities, finding ways to open up those realms, thinking through and in practice preventing our tendency to close off possible options, and giving very practical advice as to how to do so. We were discussing some of this practical advice. We were discussing this intriguing story of the butcher who spends his entire life, again, just hacking meat, but then realizes through that seemingly mundane stuff he has to do every day that he actually can ultimately find the way. And we noticed how incredibly similar that vision was to Confucius, ironically enough. Here's Confucius, seemingly a radically different thinker, arguing against something very much as we're seeing in Zhuangzi. Both are saying it's through the daily ways we live, our seemingly mundane everyday lives, that you can become something extraordinary. And it's on that point I would like to begin our lecture today. Because immediately, as we've noted at the very tail end of the Monday lecture, that surprising and counterintuitive parallel raises a ton of questions for us. The first is the most obvious. If there's a surprising similarity, what's the difference? In other words, why does Zhuangzi think he needs to change a ton of what Confucius was talking about? Why does he think we need a dramatic change in terminology? Why does he think we need a radically different way of writing a text? Why does he think it's very helpful to give tons of stories of Confucius talking to his disciples, saying, to put it mildly, rather different things than he's actually being portrayed as saying in the Analects? In other words, what is Zhuangzi up to? And I'd like to begin with that as our opening question. If it's through the daily stuff that we can achieve all of this, if that's how we do it, what's different? To get at this, let's say a bit more about Confucius, reminding ourselves of some of what Confucius was up to, and then drawing the contrast, and parallels, but also contrast. First, let's remember Confucius a bit. As we noted, very similar, it's through these daily rituals that we're training ourselves, training our ways of responding to the world, training ourselves to respond in better ways, training ourselves to act in ways that will affect others for the better, and slowly over time, training ourselves to become an incredible human being. Note, however, the key for Confucius is precisely that this was by focusing on the human. Let me just remind you of a few of these examples. The wonderful one we discussed about ancestral sacrifices, where he's asked about these ancestral spirits. And his response was, well, you sacrifice as if they're present. Because, of course, the focus of the ritual is the human. You do the ancestral sacrifice to transform yourself as a human being, to be better able to understand and sense the degree to which what you are comes in part from what the previous generations did for you, and you're trying to inculcate that, learn lessons from that, to help you also down the road be a good parent for those generations to come after you. You focus on the human, and if there are spirits up there, fine. If they're not, it's irrelevant. Focus on the human. Remember also that statement we looked at, where there's a fire in a stable, and Confucius says, oh, was anyone hurt? And the disciples noted he didn't ask about the horses. He only asked about the human beings. In other words, it's human. Disciples asked him about death. What happens after death? To which he, of course, gives his famous response, I have no idea. Don't be silly. We don't even understand life yet. Worry about that. Focus on how to live well. Focus on that. And who knows what happens after that. But let's work on what we can work on. Humans, here and now, as we live our lives, how do we become better human beings and how do we create a better world? That, for Confucius, is the key. It's also, of course, the key of the Analects. It's why we get this text portraying a person, Confucius, living his life in Book 10, doing these rituals, talking to disciples, trying to help them. It's portraying a person living his life by these ideas. The common, the mundane, what he does on a daily basis. Now, let's draw the contrast. Yes, the butcher is doing these daily mundane tasks. Through those, he achieves these incredible things. But notice how radically different everything I've just mentioned is when we turn to the Zhuangzi. First of all, does he really focus on the human? Absolutely not. He thinks that's part of the problem. Because anything that potentially will limit what we can do, anything, for Zhuangzi is a problem. If at any point we simply say a set of things is what we should be focusing on, we are at grave, grave risk of cutting off everything else. And in the case at hand, if we are simply focusing on the human, look at all of the wondrous things out there that we are ignoring. And think about how those incredibly wondrous things could potentially open up our perspective in unbelievable ways, with dramatic effects, yes, on how we live our daily mundane lives. Let's begin with some of the toughest parts of this to think through, to really get a sense for why Zhuangzi thinks this is so important. Death. As we noted, for Confucius, death is something we just don't know about in terms of what happens after. Is there an afterlife? Are there spirits up there who used to be human beings? We just don't know about it. Don't think about it. Focus on what you know. We're alive now. Be good now. Do what you can now. That's the focus. And then someday we die. And who knows what happens after that? Zhuangzi, on the contrary, does have an idea about what happens to us. And he thinks it's one that we actually should be thinking about. And intriguingly, not in a negative way, or even in a scary way. He thinks it's an important way for us to open up our vision of the world, and therefore, ironically enough, to live life more fully and more completely. Why, to begin with, do we fear death? We fear death for very obvious reasons, right? Like, look at me, I'm a human being, and when I die, I won't be, and that's going to be really sad. I won't be here anymore. This is this horrible thing. I mean, look at this, I'm a human being, and I'm going to be gone. That's because I'm making a false distinction. Yet again, I am looking at current distinctions in the world, which are true. Like, I'm a human being, and I'm not this table. That's certainly true. There are real distinctions in the world, but they're momentary. And I'm focusing on this current moment, me as a human being, as opposed to being something else. The exact same way we mentioned on Monday when we think of ourselves as, oh, I just am a certain type of person who is the following. We are reifying a certain moment of ourselves, not allowing ourselves to transform, not seeing ourselves as part of a larger world. And in the case at hand, at a larger level, it's the same thing when I fear my death. So let's think through what's going to happen when I die. I die, and of course, the stuff that's me, the chi that is me, the stuff, all of it, my spirit, my flesh, all of it, it sits on the ground, or may even be buried, depending on the rituals in question. And then, of course, worms will come in and start eating my flesh, right? And then after the worms eat my flesh, birds might eat those worms, and then bears might eat those birds. And part of what is me now, the stuff that's me, this chi that's me, will someday be worms and birds and bears. And all of this will be going on endlessly and has been going on endlessly. And isn't this fantastic? I mean, what could be more amazing? This is incredible, incredible. And the only reason I fear that is because I foolishly think that I should make this distinction of humans and the rest of the natural world. No, the rest of the natural world is equally incredible. It will be wonderful when pieces of what are us now are birds. We can fly around. How incredible is that? This is wonderful. We should not be fearing it. Now, why is Zhuangzi saying this? Obviously, one of the most difficult things for us to work through. He is not saying it in the sense that, therefore, we should look forward to dying. He certainly isn't saying, and we should hope to die soon. Very much the opposite, as you can see pervasively in the texts. He wants us to live life totally and fully and completely. The reason this is so important to him is precisely because it's part and parcel of a key way we limit ourselves. If we're really opening ourselves up to the way, fully opening ourselves up to the way, fully in the sense that we know we have always been, or the stuff that is us now, has always been part of this endless flux and transformation and endlessly always will be, if we can really do that, to the point where we wouldn't even fear our ultimate death, then we can truly live life fully. Because we can truly live our life fully engaging with the way. Which again, in a deeper sense, we've always been engaged in, and instead of fighting against that, we allow it and become an active participant in this incredible flux and transformation. What would that mean? While we live our lives? And why would we live it more fully and completely if we follow this? Well, let's look at some of his terms. Again, radically different from Confucius. And let's think through them. To begin with, one intriguing one that we've seen only briefly so far, a little bit in the Lao Tzu, but Zhuangzi is going to use it more often and in some very intriguing ways, the concepts of yin and yang. Yin and yang are two modalities of qi. So qi, as we've discussed, is everything. Everything is composed of qi, this matter and this energy. Everything is composed of that. And as we've seen, there are different types of qi, some more refined, some more turbid. And there are different modalities of it. Yin is associated with softness, coldness. Yang is associated with incredible heat, but also passions. Yang is also associated with heaven, yin with earth. They're simply different modalities of qi. Cosmologically speaking, when everything, if you're thinking from a Lao Tzu cosmology, if everything comes from this undifferentiated state, the way, cosmologically, the yang moves up, the yin moves down, you get heaven and earth, and we humans are in between. Different modalities of qi. Now for Lao Tzu, of course, the key with this is you're trying to return to this oneness. And the way Lao Tzu will do this in a constant rhetorical play is by thinking of hierarchies and always undermining the hierarchy in a way that will actually open us up to this oneness. So with yin and yang, for example, he will say, we think yang is the bigger one, the more important one, the more powerful one, and yin is the lower one, the lesser one, the one associated with softness, weakness. And of course, hardness is better than softness. And for Lao Tzu, therefore, what you do is you emphasize the lesser term, we think, softness, weakness, yin. And by focusing on that, you turn over the dualism. But of course, by turning over the dualism, you ultimately break it down. Because essentially what you're saying is, if you focus on yin, you're focusing on the soft, the weak. And the soft and the weak is what allows you to actually connect with things better, sense things better, become one with things better. And therefore, if you focus on yin rather than yang, you ultimately break down the dualism. Again, this sense of returning to the one, returning to the way. And we noted all the implications that has. Note, in contrast, the slightly different way that Zhuangzi will use these terms. He's not saying so much focus on the yin as opposed to the yang in order to undermine the dualism and get closer to the way, to get closer to oneness. The way he's going to do it is a bit different. The way he will put it is everything in the cosmos, because it's this endless flux and transformation, consists of everything in endless interplay. Equally true of yin and yang. Equally true. We mentioned seasonal change. Why does that happen? Because spontaneously the forces of yin and yang are endlessly in interplay. So you get, at the height of winter, pure yin. But by definition, pure yin, in its purest form, will bring around its opposite, yang. And hence you get the slow growth of spring, the slow growth of warmth. That grows until it reaches its height, at the pure height of summer. Heat, incredible heat, which draws out its opposite, yin. And slowly yin, over the course of the fall, grows. Things get colder. Again, don't be sad about the fact it's getting colder. It's part of a natural cycle, moving ultimately toward winter, pure yin. And that endless interplay creates the seasonal change. That is what allows, the birth of all of the things in the world, because it generates life through that endless interplay. And it's part and parcel of all of the generation of life that happens throughout the entire world. Natural species, human species, everything. Endless interplay, endless flux and transformation. Endless except those moments if it's going to be blocked, when that spontaneous endless interplay is going to be stopped. And as you can imagine, that happens primarily with that little being we talked about on Monday, human beings. We, again, uniquely in the entire cosmos, bring this to an end. And instead of having this incredible endless interplay of yin and yang, we, on the contrary, disrupt it. How do we disrupt it? Precisely through the ways we were discussing on Monday. We will have a clear plan. I am going to be the following sort of person because of my natural endowments. I will do the following set of things to get to this place in which I will be the perfect person doing this perfect set of things. We set ourselves on this perfect plan to do it, thinking that's the way we can accomplish something in the world. Meanwhile, as we mentioned on Monday, we are endlessly closing ourselves off from all of the other possibilities. And now, using these terms, what we're also doing is closing off this incredible, endless, spontaneous interplay of yin and yang. Because this will always entail an attempt to say, the typical one for us, okay, by doing this, I must be strong-willed and assertive and powerful. That's yang. And if that is yang, then of course, by saying, that's what I will be, we close off the yin. And what happens when we do that? It means we lose the harmony of yin and yang, the endless interplay of yin and yang. And this is why, as we destroy it, we close ourselves off from those yin elements in the self. And as we do that, as we disrupt this harmony, as we disrupt this interplay, we cease to have the kind of interplay of yin and yang around us. And within the body, we disrupt that harmony. And sure enough, we become miserable, sick, and we die young because we're destroying the natural, spontaneous processes that create, that generate life. We literally are living in a way that is making us sick, unhappy, and leading us to an early death. Literally. What do you do on the contrary? Imagine, on the contrary, you live your life embracing this incredible spontaneity, this incredible generation. Then what you're doing is encouraging this endless interplay of yin and yang. If you're doing that with that interplay and allowing that harmony to go on, as it does in the rest of the natural world, there's life. And there's not just life, there's life in the most exciting, expansive sense that we can imagine, or rather, beyond, because of our limited human perspective, we are likely to imagine. That is what we are attaining when we're attaining the way. You become fully engaged at every level in terms of literally your body, your emotions, your physical health, with all of this endless interplay of yin and yang going on in the universe. Instead of fighting against it, you're engaged and you're enlivened by it. Now, that's putting it, needless to say, very, I won't say abstractly, but certainly using a terminology we're not used to. So immediately, let's get back to what this would actually mean. Okay, you're not trying to follow too clear a plan, you're not trying to close yourself off, you're not trying to focus on, say, the yang as opposed to the yin, but you're trying to harmonize these. What does this actually mean in practice? Hence, Zhuangzi's stories. That is what they are aimed at doing. Because what this means in practice, he wants to say, is completely up for grabs once you start doing it. And the problem is we are limiting ourselves. So let's return to some of his stories. What is it that we're supposed to do to really get at this? We've mentioned how you live your life in this daily mundane way, training yourself to become spontaneous. But we've also now today noted that this spontaneity means becoming engaged in this endless interplay and flux and transformation of yin and yang and engaging fully in the way. With that latter part, what are we actually doing? Well, let's give again a few more stories. There's one very nice story where Zhuangzi falls asleep and he dreams he's a butterfly. And when he dreams he's a butterfly, the butterfly's floating all around. It's really fun to be a butterfly, and so it's a nice dream, the butterfly sweeping here and there. And then, of course, Zhuangzi wakes up, so he's Zhuangzi again. But then, of course, it becomes clear to him that there's a problem, because was he Zhuangzi dreaming he was a butterfly while he was asleep, or is he actually a butterfly who is actually asleep and right now dreaming he's Zhuangzi? Which is it? And then the story, as so often with Zhuangzi, ends with these intriguing lines. There must be a difference between the butterfly and Zhuangzi. In other words, the parable isn't saying it doesn't matter, we're all one and the same. No, there's a real difference. If you're a butterfly dreaming you're Zhuangzi and you're Zhuangzi dreaming as a butterfly, there's a real difference. But if you can understand the perspectives of both, you are beginning to understand the transformation of the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things meaning everything in the cosmos. Let's unpack the story. What's going on here? Well, the problem is we humans have this closed perspective. We see the world, by definition, since we're humans, purely from this human perspective. That presumably would be true of all the beings in the world. But again, we're the really problematic ones, because we think by being a human, we're something special, so much better than anything else in the cosmos, that we alone are the ones that really matter. And everything else should, of course, be under our control because we're the important ones. If, however, we could actually begin to open up that perspective and start seeing the world from all of these other perspectives. In our parable, think of the world as if you were a butterfly. If you could really start doing that, then what you are doing is beginning to get a sense of how all of these radically different perspectives, what it would be like if you're a piece of mud, or a butterfly, or a bird, or a fish, or a human being, how you see the world in radically different ways, or more immediately, how you see it if you're this person versus that person. And you begin to notice, if you really self-consciously start doing this, how incredibly limited our vision is. And as you're doing that, seeing those dramatic limitations, seeing the world from so many different perspectives, then you're getting a sense, not again that everything is purely one at any given moment. No, those things really are out there with different perspectives. Rather, what you're getting is a sense, slowly but surely, of how all of these radically different perspectives are perspectives on this endless flux and transformation of the way. That is the transformation of the 10,000 things. That is the way. And what you're trying to do is open yourself up to that way. Open yourself up to a world of radically different perspectives. More and more becoming, and note again this incredible contrast with Confucius, more and more becoming like heaven. Because what is heaven for Zhuangzi? Heaven is the entire natural world. If we were seeing the world from the perspective of heaven, which is simply the entire natural world around us, if we are seeing it from that perspective, we would truly be seeing and one with the way, seeing it from every possible perspective. Then we would be truly sensing the endless transformation of things. The human perspective always limits us dramatically and chillingly. Again, though, what does this actually mean? Well, let's return to some of these stories. If you're becoming like heaven, as opposed to simply a human being, again, human beings are great. He just doesn't want it to limit us. What is it like? Well, there's another story where Zhuangzi tells us what it was like. It turns out there have actually been some people who have really achieved this. Turns out, actually, quite a few who really achieved this oneness with the way. And they become true people, which is an intriguing way of putting it. They're still human beings, because they will be human beings until they pass away and their chi becomes other things, but they're really true human beings, fully alive human beings. And what were those people like when they've achieved it? They are people like, and again, typical Zhuangzi way of putting it in these radically imaginative, fanciful ways, they could walk through water and not get wet. They could walk through fire and not get burned. These were true people. Now, does he really mean this? Well, let's leave that aside for the moment, because I think he wants us to think in radically imaginative ways and not limit the possible meanings. But certainly he's also meaning it analogically. What he is meaning is the following. If you're really doing this, you start living your life in a radically different way, a fearless way, in which all of the things of the world, instead of hurting you and stopping you and limiting you and being causes of our anxiety and worries, become, on the contrary, things that enliven you and excite you because they're parts of the transformation of things. For example, again, moving immediately to the really mundane stuff before we jump up to the huge cosmic stuff. Oh, those little things really annoy me, right? It really annoys me when that door creaks or when my roommate comes in and closes the door in a certain way. Think about how these little things just annoy us so much. We're walking down the campus and someone rides a bike in front of us. We have to stop. Just these little things that get us so angry. Note how those add up over the course of the day. Note how those little worries and anxieties build up. Note, in other words, how things are controlling us. Note how these things are controlling our emotions and bringing out these ugly emotions of angers, these resentments, all of these things, the little things. Imagine, on the contrary, if you're training yourself such that the little things don't bother you at all. It doesn't matter in the slightest. Imagine if you start doing this at an extensive level, beyond the little things, and the big things cease to disturb you. And it not only is that they cease to disturb you in the sense that, and most importantly, you're closing yourself off from the world, but they cease to disturb you because you're opening yourself up to the world. And the world becomes incredibly exciting because you're becoming more and more engaged in it. And slowly but surely, you're becoming the sort of person who, well, again, analogically speaking, if you're walking through water, you don't get wet. And if you're walking through fire, you don't get burned. By the way, don't try this. But analogically speaking, what this means is none of these things are affecting you in this negative sense. All of these things simply become part of the excitement of the world. The little things don't impinge on us, make us anxious, make us worried. They actually become things we embrace and can become incredibly excited by. Again, you're beginning to embrace the transformation of the 10,000 things. If you're doing all of this, in other words, you begin to experience the world in this radically excited, opening way. Now, let us return to our earlier question. What then exactly are you doing, and how does this compare and contrast with what Confucius was saying? Well, let's return, as always, to these stories, which are so incredibly powerful. There's one where one of his disciples, the disciple of Confucius, asks him what he should do. Because he says, Confucius, I'm actually thinking of going to a state and trying to teach the king to be a really good king, right? To be a good human being. And I'll go there and teach the king. And Zhuangzi's response is very intriguing. Zhuangzi's response is, well, if you go right now, the way you're phrasing this, you're going to go see this king, and you're basically going to say, oh, you're being a bad king, you should be good, bad king. And of course, you're not going to make any impact on him of any kind. He's just going to get really angry at you, and he'll probably become, by being more angry, a really even worse king, and he's probably going to take it out on you, and you're going to have this miserable life if you even survive the whole thing. And so instead, cultivate yourself. And don't throw off your yin and yang, harmonize them and cultivate yourself. And then see what happens. Note the story. Note immediately how it seems to contrast with our butcher. With our butcher, remember, the butcher finds the way through cutting the meat, right? And analogically speaking, sensing these shifts in the meat, moving his knife through them, analogically speaking, the way we should be living our lives, embracing our lives by flowing and moving with the way, with our spirit sensing things and moving with them. In other words, doing his daily work, continuing, by the way, to be a butcher, and also, by the way, being a really good butcher, and through that daily work, achieving the way. But also being in society, being a very active member of society, being very actively engaged, and that's how he finds the way. Well, here we have this other story where Confucius seems to be saying, well, like literally is saying in so many words to his disciple, whoa, 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 cultivate yourself. Cultivate yourself. You're not ready to head out there yet. Cultivate yourself. And if you add up all the other stories, and there are a lot of them, they're all amazing, you'll notice they go in not just one of those two ways, they go in about any way you can imagine. All these people that he's talking about, some of them, like the butcher, do their work and they're great. There are rulers in it who actually cultivate themselves, and by the way, are amazing, amazing rulers, sensing things well and being incredible leaders. There are also people who run off into the mountains and cultivate themselves and harmonize with the yin and the yang. There are other people who have these wild things growing out of them. They start transforming into other animals, and they have the way as well. All of these are ways of achieving, in this human form, the way. And I think this, too, is a key point that he is trying to get at with the workings of these stories. The danger, I think, he is saying about Confucius, despite what he clearly does agree with, this sense of daily working through things at a daily mundane level, and through that training becoming someone extraordinary, I think the concern Zhuangzi has with Confucius is precisely that the terminology, his way of putting it, potentially limits us. It potentially is saying the only real way to do this is to do it in a way that you're engaged in society, in a certain way that you can take a leadership position and spread goodness in the world. That's the danger for Zhuangzi. Note, that's not to say it's a bad thing. That's precisely what many of the Zhuangzi figures do. But many of the Zhuangzi figures do radically, completely different things. And that, I think, is the key that Zhuangzi is trying to get at. If, in other words, you start doing this, if you start training yourself in all the senses that we've been discussing, so you're training yourself through the daily stuff to open yourself up, sense with your spirit the movement of things, harmonize these forces in your body, the yin and the yang, slowly gaining health and vitality and excitement in the world around you. As you're doing this, you also become more and more aware of the things that excite you and the things that inspire you. And you become more willing to flow, in a very strong sense of that term, with those things that are pulling you in an exciting way. Not because you're being pulled by external forces. Again, you're becoming like someone who can walk through fire not being burned, analogically speaking. You're not being driven by external forces. You're engaging with things. And through that engagement, you slowly become fully engaged with everything around you. Always trying to break the dangers of thinking in too limited a way, in too perspectival a way, endlessly playing the game of, am I the human being dreaming I'm a butterfly or the butterfly dreaming I'm a human being? In other words, seeing the world from as many possible perspectives as you can, noting how the ways you're living your life are closing you off from things. An endless process of training yourself to spontaneously be engaged in whatever that would mean. And as you're doing that, hence you get, in Zhuangzi's stories, an unbelievable variety of possibilities opening up to you. What would this actually mean you should do for your life? Zhuangzi is being not only as intentionally ambiguous about that, I think he is trying to give you these unbelievable stories saying this could take you in any conceivable direction, or more importantly, directions you actually could not conceive. It could mean anything. And hence these incredible stories of the incredible things you start achieving once you do this, going in radically different directions. And note, for all of these different things that people start doing, all of these different directions that people start going in, note the types of terminology he's using, because it's so telling of what he's getting at. The terminology are always things along the following lines. This unbelievable excitement, unbelievable vitality, unbelievable sort of joyous exuberance at the possibilities of life, unbelievable embracing of this endless flux and transformation, constantly breaking free from these things that limit us, that prevent us from seeing and being engaged in this incredible set of possibilities. Every single story is precisely aimed at doing that, inspiring you to engage this way, trying to teach you not to close off what you think you are doing, or close off what you are doing thinking it's liberating you, when in fact it probably isn't, and endlessly trying to break our perspectives. So if, in short, we think, okay, I am a good liberated individual because I'm going to look inside, find myself, find my true self, and therefore become what I want to become. It sounds great, but I think Zhuangzi would immediately say, in practice, it limits you, because what you're going to find is a piece of you. Imagine if you think of yourself in this radically different way. This stuff that was other stuff over the past many millennia, stuff that will be other stuff over the millennia to come. But in this current type of stuff, this incredibly wonderful thing, a human being, but a complex thing with all these different emotions and dispositions. And then what you're doing is realizing how that stuff that is you now is always, by the way we're living our lives, in danger of becoming limited, constrained, not exploring what you could be, and hence becoming sick, dying young, miserable. Well, sick, miserable, dying young. Basically, in other words, we're slowly destroying what we could become. And if, on the contrary, you think, no, this stuff that's me is kind of like the same, in fact, literally in this cosmology, is the same as all the other stuff out there, and what I'm going to be doing is therefore actively engaging with all of this different stuff out there, and through that active engagement with all of that different stuff out there, we'll actually slowly but surely start fully engaging in it, fully finding all of these things that excite me and inspire me, finding all of these ways, returning to our text, of truly becoming one with this endless flux and transformation. Realizing absolutely from day one, you have no idea what direction this will take you in, because it could take you in directions literally you could not imagine. And therefore, part of the endless training process is constantly trying to prevent these limitations we put on ourselves, constantly trying to stop these blinders we put on ourselves, constantly trying, again, returning to our text, to see the world from the point of view of heaven, not from our limited human perspective. And if you do that, the text is saying, then you truly live as a human being. This isn't an anti-human text. It's saying, truly live as a human being, truly engage as a human being, truly become all that you can be as a human being, which is extraordinary. And yes, we will die. But the adventure doesn't end. It just means it continues in radically, radically, radically different ways. In short, Zhuangzi has taken a key vision of Confucius, training through daily rituals to become a radically different human being, and is now trying to dramatically expand what that would mean in terms of an entire way of thinking cosmologically and an entire engagement with the entire world around us. It is an incredible text, and that, returning to our opening points on Monday, is why he feels he needs to write it as he does. If he simply laid this out, it would be interesting, but would we really change our lives? The reason he has to lay it out as he does is he's trying to inspire us to change our lives. He's trying to give us these stories that will inspire us to think of the world in these incredible ways, to think of the world as if we were a bird or a fish or a butterfly, to engage us in these incredibly exciting ways, to give us these people from all sorts of walks of life doing radically different things, endlessly trying to inspire us to do something unbelievably beyond what we think we're capable. Endlessly, in other words, trying to say, live life unbelievably if you're a human being, because it's incredible to be a human being, precisely because we limit ourselves, prevent ourselves from thinking that. That's why we don't live our lives fully. Note, in short, that he is taking this Confucian vision and reading it in this radically different cosmological way to try to open up everything. And let me note immediately, in terms of where we're going, next week we will be reading Xunzi, a Confucian, and a Confucian who has read Zhuangzi incredibly carefully, thinks Zhuangzi, is incredibly onto something, and we will see how Xunzi will try to redirect the Confucian project to try to engage all of this. In short, even the Confucians will realize Zhuangzi is onto something incredibly exciting and important. And as always, let me just conclude with a recommendation. Over these next few days, as we mentioned, but now I'll use some of these new terms that we've introduced, begin to do this. Begin to feel this harmony of yin and yang, which may sound an odd way to put it, but concretely, note, when you get angry, a flourishing of yang, you calm yourself, that's yin. Notice when these little things bother us, anger, yang, calm yourself, yin. Start to go through the day, harmonizing this yin and the yang. Seeing things that really excite you, and instead of being angry at them, begin to engage them more. Begin to feel that higher resonance that comes. Begin to feel that excitement that comes. What Zhuangzi would call feeling the way, becoming part of this transformation of the 10,000 things. Begin to do this. Begin to gain a sense of what he's talking about, and in a deeper sense, begin to notice how the world begins to open up and how the possibilities of the world begin to develop in front of you. Notice how you're limiting what you think you can do, and begin to self-consciously break that, thinking, I'm not capable of doing this. Well, what happens if you think of the world in which you are capable of doing this? And self-consciously start breaking down these limits, engaging more, and start feeling how dramatically different you begin sensing and engaging in the world. That is what Zhuangzi is calling on you to do, and as you begin to get a sense of this, you will find these stories will just become a part of your life, because they're incredibly inspiring visions of what it would mean to live a life this way. Thank you so much, and see you all soon. Thank you.